The morning rain had turned the country road into a muddy mess when Sarah noticed the black Land Rover sitting at an odd angle near the stone bridge. Steam was rising from under the hood, and she could see a figure in uniform standing beside, its hands on his hips in obvious frustration. Sarah pulled her small car over and stepped out, her nursing shoes squelching in the mud. The man in uniform turned toward her, and she was surprised to see the distinctive red tunic and tall black hat of a royal guard, though he had removed the ceremonial bearskin and set it carefully on the passenger seat of his vehicle. "Car trouble?" she asked, approaching with a friendly smile. The guard looked embarrassed. "I'm afraid so. I'm Sergeant James Mitchell, and I seem to have gotten myself into quite the predicament. The engine overheated, and now it won't start at all." Sarah introduced herself and walked around the Land Rover, noting the steam still escaping from the radiator. "My father was a mechanic," she explained. "Mind if I take a look?" James seemed hesitant at first, clearly not used to accepting help from civilians, especially while in uniform. But something about Sarah's confident manner and genuine offer of assistance convinced him to accept. "I was heading back to barracks, after a ceremony at the local cathedral," he explained as Sarah popped the hood. "This old thing has been giving me trouble for weeks, but I keep putting off getting it properly fixed." Sarah examined the engine with practiced eyes. The radiator hose had burst and coolant was pooled beneath the vehicle. "It's not too serious," she said, wiping her hands on the cloth James offered her. "The hose has split, but if we can patch it temporarily and refill the coolant, you should make it to a proper garage." James looked impressed. "You really know your way around an engine?" "Like I said, my father taught me well. He always said a person should be able to fix what they depend on." Sarah glanced at her watch. "I've got some emergency repair tape in my car, and there's a service station about 5 miles up the road where we can get coolant." As she walked back to her car to retrieve her emergency kit, James couldn't help but notice how naturally she had taken charge of the situation. Most people would have simply driven past, but here was this woman, clearly on her way somewhere important judging by her professional attire, stopping to help a complete stranger. Sarah returned with a small toolbox and some heavy-duty tape. "This should hold long enough to get you to safety," she said, kneeling beside the engine despite her clean clothes. As she worked, she chatted easily about the local area, mentioning that she worked at the nearby hospital and was familiar with all the best repair shops in the region. "There we go," she said finally, standing and dusting off her hands. "Let's see if she'll start now." James turned the key, and after a moment of uncertain coughing, the engine roared to life. He couldn't hide his relief and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, genuinely moved by her kindness. "You've saved me from what could have been a very long and embarrassing walk back to barracks." Sarah laughed. "Just promise me, you'll get that hose replaced properly, and maybe keep some emergency coolant in the boot from now on." As they talked, James found himself struck not just by her mechanical knowledge, but by her easy confidence and warm personality. There was something about her that seemed both familiar and intriguing, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. "The least I can do is follow you to the service station to make sure you get there safely," Sarah offered. James accepted gratefully, and as they prepared to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was going to be more significant than either of them realized. There was something about this woman who had appeared out of nowhere to help him that seemed almost too good to be true. The service station was busy with the usual morning rush, but the mechanic, Tom, recognized Sarah immediately and waved her over to the front of the queue. James watched with growing curiosity as several people greeted her warmly, clearly knowing her well. "Sarah, love, what brings you here so early?" Tom asked, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "Not me this time, Tom. My friend here needs a new radiator hose and some coolant," she said, gesturing toward James, who was still in his impressive Royal Guard uniform. Tom's eyes widened as he took in James's appearance. "Blimey, don't see many of your sort around these parts. You're one of the Queen's Guards, aren't you?" James nodded politely. "Sergeant Mitchell. I was very fortunate that this lady stopped to help me." As Tom worked on the Land Rover, Sarah and James sat on a bench outside the garage, sharing coffee from the vending machine. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, and James found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did while in uniform. "So you work at the hospital?" he asked, genuinely interested in learning more about his rescuer. "Senior nurse in the emergency department," Sarah replied. "Been there about 8 years now. It's demanding work, but I love helping people." "What about you? Have you been a guard long?" James told her about his 12 years of service, the ceremonies he'd participated in, and the pride he felt in his role. As they talked, he noticed how attentively she listened, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest rather than just polite conversation. "Must be quite an honor," Sarah said, standing guard at the palace, being part of such important occasions. "It is," James agreed. "Though days like today remind me that even guardsmen have ordinary problems like broken-down cars." Sarah laughed. "Well, I'm glad I could help with that ordinary problem." As she reached for her coffee cup, the morning sunlight caught something on her left hand that made James's heart skip a beat. There, on her ring finger, was a distinctive band that he recognized immediately. It was a simple gold ring, but embedded in it was a small crest that he had seen countless times in his years of service. The ring bore the royal coat of arms. James tried to keep his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. That particular ring was only given to members of the royal family, or those with very close connections to the monarchy. He had seen similar rings on the hands of minor royals and their immediate families during various ceremonies, but never expected to encounter one in such an ordinary setting. "That's an interesting ring," he said carefully, not wanting to seem presumptuous but unable to ignore what he had seen. Sarah glanced down at her hand and seemed to realize what had caught his attention. For the first time since they had met, she appeared slightly uncomfortable. "Oh, this old thing," she said, her voice changing slightly. "It's been in my family for quite some time." James sensed there was much more to the story, but before he could respond, Tom called out that the Land Rover was ready. The moment passed, but James filed away what he had observed, his curiosity now thoroughly piqued. As they walked back to their vehicles, James found himself studying Sarah more carefully. Now that he was looking for it, there was something about her bearing, her way of speaking, that seemed refined in a way that went beyond simple education or professional training. "Well, Sergeant Mitchell," Sarah said as they reached their cars, "I hope the rest of your journey goes smoothly." "Please call me James," he said. "And I hope this isn't the last time our paths cross. I'd love to repay your kindness somehow." Sarah smiled, but there was something reserved about it now, as if she was holding back. "Perhaps they will," she said. "It's a smaller world than people think." As James drove away, following Sarah's directions to the main road, he couldn't stop thinking about that ring and the way she had deflected his question about it. His years of training had taught him to be observant, and every instinct was telling him that there was much more to Sarah than met the eye. The mystery of who she really was had just begun to unfold. For the next 3 days, James couldn't get Sarah out of his mind. During his shifts at Buckingham Palace, standing at attention in his sentry box, he found his thoughts drifting back to their encounter. The image of that distinctive ring kept returning to him, and he began to do some discreet investigating during his off-duty hours. The royal coat of arms ring was not something that could be purchased in any jewelry shop. James had learned during his service that such rings were personally commissioned and given only to individuals with documented royal connections. The fact that Sarah wore one so casually, as if it were simply a family heirloom, suggested a story far more complex than she had let on. On Thursday evening, James made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of heading directly back to barracks after his shift, he drove to the hospital where Sarah worked. He told himself he simply wanted to thank her properly for her help, but deep down, he knew his curiosity about her identity was driving him. The emergency department was busy when he arrived, still in his dress uniform since he had come straight from duty. The sight of a royal guard walking through the hospital corridors caused quite a stir among staff and patients alike. "Excuse me," he said to a nurse at the reception desk. "I'm looking for Sarah. She helped me with my car a few days ago and I wanted to thank her properly." The nurse looked confused. "Sarah who? We have 3 Sarahs working in this department." James realized he had never learned her surname. She's a senior nurse, about 30. Blonde hair, very kind. She mentioned she's been working here for 8 years. Oh, you must mean Sarah Catherine, the nurse said with a smile. But I'm afraid she's not working tonight. She only works weekdays and she left about an hour ago. Sarah Catherine. The name struck James as oddly formal, and he filed it away as another piece of the puzzle. Could you tell me when she'll be working next, he asked. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock shift. But if you want to leave a message, I can make sure she gets it. James thanked the nurse and left. But instead of driving home, he found himself sitting in his car in the hospital car park thinking. Something about this whole situation felt significant in a way he couldn't explain. The next morning, James did something he had never done in his 12 years of service. He called in sick. It was dishonest, and it went against everything he stood for as a guardsman. But his need to solve this mystery had become overwhelming. At 7:15, he was back at the hospital, this time in civilian clothes. He positioned himself in the main lobby where he could see the staff entrance and waited. Sarah arrived at exactly 7:20, hurrying through the doors with the purposeful stride of someone who was running slightly late. She was in her nursing uniform, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, looking every bit the dedicated healthcare professional she had claimed to be. James approached her carefully. Sarah, she turned and her face showed genuine surprise and pleasure at seeing him. James, what are you doing here? Don't tell me you've had car trouble again. No, the Land Rover is running perfectly thanks to your help, he said. I came to thank you properly. I realized I never got your full name and I wanted to send you something to show my appreciation. That's very thoughtful, but completely unnecessary, Sarah said, glancing at her watch. I'm Sarah Catherine Windsor Davies, she said quickly. But I really must dash. We're short-staffed this morning. She hurried toward the lifts, leaving James standing in the lobby with his mouth slightly open. Windsor Davies. The hyphenated surname confirmed what the ring had already suggested. Windsor was the royal family name, and Davies was likely her mother's maiden name or her father's non-royal surname. As the lift doors closed behind Sarah, James saw her looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Was it regret? Concern? Or perhaps relief that the truth was finally beginning to come out? Back in his car, James sat in stunned silence. If his suspicions were correct, the woman who had stopped to help him fix his car was not just any ordinary citizen. The combination of the ring, the formal way people treated her, and now that surname all pointed to one incredible conclusion. Sarah Catherine Windsor Davies was likely a member of the extended royal family, someone who had chosen to live a quiet, normal life away from the spotlight and protocol that surrounded the monarchy. And somehow, by pure chance, she had become his unlikely roadside rescuer. The question now was what he should do with this knowledge, and whether Sarah wanted him to know who she really was. That evening, James made a decision that could have ended his career. He accessed the royal family database that all senior guards had limited access to for security purposes. His hands shook slightly as he typed in the name, Sarah Catherine Windsor Davies. The screen loaded slowly, and then there she was. The same kind eyes, the same warm smile, but in the official photograph she looked more formal, more regal. The information made his heart race. Lady Sarah Catherine Windsor Davies, age 32, granddaughter of the Queen's late cousin, Lord Edward Windsor. She had grown up on a family estate in Scotland, attended Cambridge University where she studied nursing, and had deliberately chosen a career away from royal duties. The file noted that she had specifically requested privacy and minimal security presence, wanting to live as normally as possible. The most surprising detail was that she had given up her official royal allowance and worked full-time to support herself, despite being 20th in line to the throne. She had no official royal duties and rarely appeared at public events, preferring her life as a working nurse. James closed the file quickly, his mind spinning. He had helped guard ceremonies where distant royals had been present, but he had never imagined he would meet one changing his tire on a muddy country road. Over the weekend, James struggled with what to do next. Part of him felt he should maintain professional distance now that he knew her true identity. But another part of him couldn't forget the genuine connection he had felt with her, the way she had treated him as simply another human being in need of help. On Monday morning, he made his choice. Instead of avoiding the hospital, he went back, this time with a small gift and a carefully written note. Sarah was just finishing her shift when he appeared in the staff corridor. She looked surprised but pleased to see him. "James, this is becoming a habit?" she said with a smile, though he noticed a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I brought you something," he said, offering her a small wrapped package. "Just a small thank you for your help." Sarah opened it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "This is lovely, but you really shouldn't have." "There's a note inside," James said quietly. Sarah opened the journal and read the handwritten note. "Dear Sarah, I know who you are, and I want you to know that it doesn't change anything about how grateful I am for your kindness, or how much I enjoyed our conversation. I hope we can still be friends. If you'd prefer I keep my distance, I'll understand completely. James." Sarah's face went pale as she read, and she looked up at James with a mixture of concern and resignation. "How long have you known?" she asked, quietly. "I suspected from the moment I saw your ring," James admitted. "But I confirmed it a few days ago. I'm sorry if I overstepped by looking you up." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and James feared he had ruined everything. Then she surprised him with a small laugh. "You know, it's almost a relief," she said. "I've been trying to live a completely normal life, but there are always little moments where I have to be careful about what I say or do. It's exhausting sometimes." "Is that why you became a nurse?" James asked. "To have a normal life?" "Partly," Sarah admitted, "but mainly because I wanted to do something meaningful with my life. I didn't want to just cut ribbons and attend charity galas. I wanted to actually help people." They walked slowly toward the hospital exit, and James sensed that something fundamental had shifted between them. The pretense was gone, but so was some of the easy naturalness of their first meeting. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they reached the car park. "What's it like being part of all the ceremony and tradition? Do you ever feel trapped by it?" James considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "There are days when the protocol and formality feel suffocating. But then there are moments when I remember that I'm part of something bigger than myself, something that has meaning and history." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose we both understand something about duty and service then, just from different sides of it." As they reached their cars, Sarah turned to him with a more serious expression. "James, if we're going to be friends, I need to know I can trust you. My privacy, my ability to do this job without complications, it means everything to me." "You have my word," James said solemnly. "Your secret is safe with me." But even as he made that promise, James wondered if their newfound honesty might complicate things in ways neither of them had anticipated. Over the following weeks, James and Sarah began to meet regularly for coffee after her shifts. What started as simple friendship gradually deepened into something neither of them had expected. Their shared understanding of duty and service created a unique bond that neither had experienced with anyone else. Sarah showed James her world away from royal protocol. She took him to her favorite local restaurant, a simple place where she was known as just Sarah the nurse, and where they served the best shepherd's pie in town. She introduced him to her colleagues, who accepted him warmly once they realized he made their beloved Sarah smile more than she had in years. In return, James shared stories of his life and service that he had never told anyone. He spoke about the loneliness that sometimes came with the job, the pressure of maintaining perfect discipline at all times, and his deep respect for the institution he served. "Sometimes I watch the ceremonies from inside," he told her one evening as they walked along the Thames, "and I think about all the history, all the people who have stood where I stand. It's humbling and overwhelming at the same time." Sarah understood in a way that surprised them both. "I feel the same thing sometimes, but from the other direction. All those expectations, all that history that you're supposed to live up to. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had been born into a completely ordinary family. Do you regret your choice to step away from royal duties? James asked. Never, Sarah said firmly. But I do sometimes wonder what it would be like to not have to think about it at all. To just be completely, utterly normal. Their relationship faced its first real test when Sarah's supervisor at the hospital, Margaret, approached her with concerns. Sarah, love, I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't take offense, Margaret said one afternoon. This man you've been seeing, this James, some of the staff are wondering about his background. He's very formal, very correct, and there are rumors that he's some kind of security officer. Sarah felt her heart sink. She had known this moment would come eventually. He's a friend, Margaret, a good man who helped me when I needed it. I'm sure he is, dear. But you know how careful we have to be in this job. We see so many sensitive situations, handle so much confidential information. If there's anything about his background that could create complications. Sarah realized that her two worlds were beginning to collide in ways she hadn't anticipated. That evening, she called James and asked to meet him urgently. They met at their usual cafe, but Sarah seemed tense and distracted. We have a problem, she said without preamble. People at work are starting to ask questions about you. They're concerned that you might be some kind of security officer or investigator. James felt his stomach drop. What did you tell them? The truth, as much as I could. But James, if they start investigating your background, they're going to discover that you're a royal guard. And if they discover that, they might start wondering why a royal guard is spending time with me. The implications hit them both simultaneously. If Sarah's colleagues discovered her true identity, her carefully constructed normal life would be over. The hospital would have to implement security protocols. Her patients might treat her differently, and she would lose the anonymity that allowed her to do her job effectively. Maybe we should take a break, Sarah said quietly, though the words obviously pained her. Just until things settle down. James reached across the table and took her hand. Or maybe it's time to stop hiding. Sarah looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time for both of us to stop letting protocol and expectations control every aspect of our lives. Maybe it's time to decide what we want, regardless of what other people think. James, you don't understand the complications. If people know who I am, everything changes. My job, my relationships, my entire life becomes public property. And if people know about us, my career could be over, James said. Royal guards aren't supposed to have personal relationships with members of the royal family, no matter how distant. It's considered a conflict of interest. They sat in silence for a long moment, both understanding the full weight of their situation. So what do we do? Sarah asked finally. James looked at her, this remarkable woman who had changed his life in ways he was still discovering. We decide what's more important, playing it safe or taking a chance on something real. The choice they made in that moment would determine not just their future together, but the direction of both their carefully ordered lives. For the first time since they had met, they were facing a decision that couldn't be solved with emergency tape and coolant. 3 months later, James stood in the office of his commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, holding an envelope that contained his resignation from the Royal Guard. His decision had not been made lightly, but it had been made with absolute certainty. Sergeant Mitchell, the colonel said, reviewing the paperwork with a frown. This is highly unusual. You have an exemplary record, and you're throwing away a distinguished career. May I ask why? Personal reasons, sir. I've found something more important than duty to the crown. The colonel studied him carefully. This wouldn't have anything to do with the rumors I've been hearing about you spending time with a certain young lady, would it? James met his superior's gaze steadily. It has everything to do with that, sir. Meanwhile, across London, Sarah was having a similar conversation with her hospital administrator. But unlike James, she had made the opposite choice. I want to stay, she told Dr. Patterson firmly. This job, this hospital, these patients, this is where I belong. I'm not asking for special treatment or additional security. I'm asking to continue being allowed to do the work I love. Dr. Patterson looked concerned. Sarah, you know I support you completely, But if the press gets hold of this story, if they start following you around, it could disrupt the entire hospital. Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Sarah said. But I'm not running away from my life because of what might happen. The truth had come out gradually over those 3 months. First, a journalist had recognized James leaving the hospital and begun investigating. Then a former Cambridge classmate had spotted Sarah and mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to someone else, until the story had reached the gossip columns of several newspapers. Royal Guard romance, the headlines had read. Hidden princess, found working as nurse. The stories were mostly accurate, which somehow made them more invasive than if they had been completely fabricated. But something unexpected had happened as the story spread. Instead of the scandal and disruption they had both feared, something closer to celebration had emerged. Sarah's patients admired her even more for choosing service over privilege. Her colleagues rallied around her, protective of the woman they had come to love and respect. At the palace, there had been initial concern about protocol and precedent, but ultimately the royal family had been supportive. Sarah's aunt, a minor royal herself, had issued a brief statement praising Sarah's dedication to nursing and asking for privacy for both her and James. The evening after James submitted his resignation, he and Sarah met at the same bridge where they had first encountered each other. The Land Rover was parked nearby, running perfectly. "So," Sarah said, taking his hand, "what does an ex-royal guard do with his life?" James smiled. "Well, I've been thinking about that. Tom at the garage has offered me a job. Apparently word has gotten around that I know someone who can teach anyone to fix a car." Sarah laughed. "Is that so? And would you be happy working as a mechanic?" "I think I would be," James said seriously, "especially if it meant I could see you every day without worrying about regulations and protocol." They stood quietly for a moment, watching the sun set over the countryside where their story had begun. "Do you have any regrets?" Sarah asked. James considered the question. "About giving up the guard? No. About that morning when my radiator hose burst? Never." He turned to face her. "What about you? Any regrets about not running away when you had the chance?" Sarah touched the ring on her finger, the one that had started James's investigation and changed both their lives. "You know what I regret? I regret that it took a broken-down car for us to find each other." "Well," James said, pulling her closer, "remind me to send a thank-you note to that radiator hose." 6 months later, the local newspaper ran a small announcement that few people outside their community noticed. Sarah Catherine Windsor Davies and James Mitchell had been married in a simple ceremony at the village church, with Tom the mechanic serving as best man and Margaret from the hospital as maid of honor. The bride wore her grandmother's simple wedding dress and her great-grandmother's diamond necklace, the only concession to her royal heritage. The groom wore his best civilian suit, looking happier than he had ever looked in any uniform. And in the church car park, decorated with white ribbons and tin cans, sat a perfectly maintained Land Rover, ready to carry them into their new life, together. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary problems. Sometimes a burst radiator hose on a muddy country road can change 2 lives forever, and sometimes the best fairy tales are the ones that end not with a castle, but with a choice to build something real and lasting together. Their story had begun with Sarah helping James repair his vehicle. It continued with them learning to repair the careful distance that duty and protocol had built around both their hearts. And it would go on, day by day, as they discovered that the most important thing they could ever fix was the loneliness they had both carried for far too long.